A new Harvard study is breaking down many of the different ways that the media failed in their coverage of the presidential candidates throughout the primaries on both the Republican and the Democratic sides. There are a lot of interesting charts here. There's nothing I like more, so let's jump right into it. Let's bring up this first one that's going to show the percentage of favorable coverage of Donald Trump. Now, technically, it's positive or neutral in tone. I would say, considering how constantly offensive Donald Trump is, if you're writing with something neutral in tone, that's favorable for Donald Trump. So USA Today, 3/4 of all the articles that they wrote about him were positive. The LA Times, like that I don't think of as some conservative outlet. The New York Times, 63% was positive or neutral, and he has never failed to give us things to attack him on. Even the Washington Post, who have been denied press credentials by Trump himself, 65% of it was positive or neutral. And there's been a lot of it, by the way. This is not the effect of small sample size or anything like that. That's literally hundreds, possibly thousands of articles over the course of a year. And take a look at this next chart. This is even more troubling. It's the percentage breakdown of what that coverage was about. Now, you would imagine issues and ideology, this is politics, so that should be the important part. And it was. It was 12% of all the coverage. Polls and projections, look, you got to cover those. I get it. I think it should be smaller than the purple, but it's something. But like personal qualities, activities, and events, which, by the way, if you're going to cover the activities and the events, cover what he talked about on issues at the events, not just the fucking events.
But I think that's what, I think the biggest percentage of that was at 27, where it was other, maybe?
No, I think it was the
God
events.
knows. Can you see that again?
34.
34 is the large one.
events.
That's
Activities and
significant.
events.
The others,
So
hair.
this is the thing with a lot of these publications. I noticed the first chart was favorable, there's positive or neutral in tone, right? So I wonder what that breakdown is between positive and neutral. Because neutral
each
is
one of
what,
those?
yeah, neutral is what a lot of news organizations want. It's what we complain about happens at CNN, that they just want to play it down the middle and say, Trump said this and his opponent said this. We're staying out of this and not going to actually lead you to any kind of information, to give you information that'll lead you to the answer of who's lying, who's wrong, who's right, who's clueless.
Yeah.
So that's, I think it's a lot of neutral of those percentages. Neutral is probably a large percentage of it because that's all they want to be. And then it's about things that are other because they're just going to say what's been happening. His activities, Donald Trump went here today. And that's all they're going to say.
I don't know about that.
And he said this.
I don't know about that. I mean, I have on occasion turned Fox News on, and it is
Fox,
just
we know Fox.
one. Well, that was 73%, right? So, that was just one long blowjob for basically the last 12 months for Sean Hannity on Donald Trump. It's just, it becomes state television. If you don't have any commentary, they would flick between. There were certain, I didn't see it happen, but I read a report. They had an important news briefing. They were in the midst of something, and they cut the person off to go to cover a Donald Trump rally.
Yes.
Without any kind of analysis or commentary, that then becomes state television. And CNN, to be honest with you, were not as guilty, but from what the CNN coverage I saw, they were pretty culpable in a lot of this. He is the embodiment of the merger of politics and entertainment. And that is what you get when you get a reality star. This is what you get, and he has done it artfully. And when you get the head of CBS saying, it may not be good for America, but it's really good for us. Yeah. I'm sorry to say it, but he's awful, but I want to see more of it. Let's see more of it. Then you know you're really up Schitt's Creek. Yeah. Because it becomes about ratings and advertising and just driving that. And impartiality and all of that stuff goes out the window, and all they want to see is a cage match.
Yeah, exactly.
They just want to talk about it. Once it happens, what Donald Trump did today? It turns into.
I think it's more than that.
Shit.
No, it's more than that. They had a responsibility. If the media had cut off the news feed for him early on, we talked about what could the Republican Party do, or what could the other candidates do. It was actually interesting. If the media had cut off his news feed, cut off his outlet, they would have cut his legs away. He would have been dead in the water. But every time he came out with something crazy, they gave it credence. Yeah. Every time he came out with something offensive and racist, they gave it oxygen. If they had just said, you know what, this is the ramblings of a xenophobe who is got no place on the stage, and we're just not going to cover it, then I bet you he would not have lasted 3 or 4 months.
That's one of the conclusions, basically, of this study, is that he eventually tapped into something, but early on he was propped up. and that's what allowed him to get to the point
Millions
where,
and millions and millions of dollars of free
well,
advertising.
let's talk about the free advertising then. That's the next chart. This, by the way, is not everybody. This is not the cable news and all of that. This is like the New York Times and NBC, not MSNBC, not CNN, not Fox News. This is just a few of the outlets. During a one-year period, Trump got $55 million in ad equivalent value. I mean, the surprising thing is that some of the other candidates got so much, and I didn't think that they did.
Jesus.
Yeah. And Bush, that's on top of the $115 million he spent.
What the I mean, Jesus.
Totally.
That's terrible. That's a terrible
Pretty
stat.
amazing. And they just hand it out. And he still bitches about the coverage. Now, there are some other parts. Some of this information is going to, I think, confirm a lot of what we already believe, what we already believed about the media and their effect on the race. But some of these charts caused me to have to question a little bit about what I believe. So let's bring up this next one. You're going to see a breakdown for some of the candidates who ended up lasting longer in the race, the percentage of the coverage of that candidate devoted to issues, and then the percentage of issue coverage specifically that was negative in tone. And so that red bar is how negative it was, but only while talking about the issues. It doesn't mean that they were talking about how stupid their hair looks or anything. So Sanders, only 7% of the coverage of him was devoted to issues, which I would have loved for that number to be a little bit higher. The negativity in terms of it was actually not that high. Now, Hillary Clinton, much higher percentage of the overall coverage of her was about her issues, but that was almost universally negative, actually. Now, overall, the percentage coverage on issues is low for all four of those candidates, but Clinton did actually receive the most negative coverage. Now, if you could jump to this next one, you see a breakdown of the overall percentage of the news coverage, and Trump, not surprisingly, was the largest. Although people like Rubio, Bush, got more than I would have thought they did, actually, in terms of the coverage, considering that some of them didn't last nearly as long as him. And then these final two, if we can run through them really fast, if you bring up this one, you're going to see the tone of coverage, which is the percentage of positive references minus the negative references. I believe this is for Bernie Sanders right here. And then this one is Hillary Clinton. So that March dump is when he started to win some of the early primaries, and there was a lot of news coverage about how this was 2008 all over again. And a lot of the coverage about her was negative, that she wasn't connecting with the voters and everything, and she was running the same sort of campaign. And some of her campaign tactics, I think, were a little bit underhanded. And so the coverage went very negative, but gradually became more positive.
And this kind of could mold with the previous thing we were talking about, with the concerted effort to muddy the waters was the term, and make sure that the things that are getting talked about aren't as clear as it could be about her, and therefore you stop thinking the negative things that change that dip, and it brings it back even.
Yeah,
it works. That kind of coordination works.
Yeah.
But it does also, it brings you back to the thing, again, I come back to this subject again, but it bears mentioning, I think, is the extent to which the media shapes the outcome of these things. And so why it's so critical for, that there are outlets for alternatives to the mainstream. And I know it sort of like sounds a bit self-serving, but there's a well-known psychological thing called the bandwagon effect, which is if you say that something is true, so if you say that Hillary Clinton is in the lead and she has all those superdelegates, and then people are more likely to vote for her because they think that she is the leader and the person who is going to be the candidate. And so there is a psychological survey and research that's shown that people just gravitate towards that person. And so I think that same criteria can be applied to the media. So when you have those issues being raised in that way and the coverage, the predominance of the coverage being handed to one candidate or the other, the interesting thing for me was that the Bernie Sanders issues was so low because he was such an issues-based candidate.
Yeah.
I thought that was curious. I wonder how they arrived at that, but
I don't know. I mean, a lot of it was probably polling. Like they would consider that distinct. And so where he's currently at against Hillary Clinton, his attacks against Hillary Clinton, that might not be considered an issue because it's not his issues when he's calling out her. I would say that should be included in that. But we saw that even for Donald Trump, it was very low. Also because he doesn't talk about the issues very much. That's true, too.
How is it that his issue coverage was higher than Bernie's?
That's true. That's pathetic, actually.
I don't understand.
I don't know how that works.
I wonder what the
but I didn't go to Harvard.
Specifics behind what issues were. His issues about building a wall and then Muslim ban. Like,
well, for the news coverage specifically,
issues that are stupidity.
Yeah, well, for the news coverage specifically, they mean when the purpose of the segment and the content of the segment was describing and even reacting to an issue position from a candidate, which is not And it's not 100%. I mean, it's not 100% on here. We'll talk about polls and we'll talk about their attacks and stuff like that. And that's not the same as simply educating about the issues, which you have to do that over time. You're the media.
He never gave any specifics about issues. Sorry, we went over on this.
Yeah, sorry. But anyway, a lot of people, I think, very justifiably have attacked the media. Now, again, this is largely ignoring the cable news, which would probably be even more pathetic, and was also certainly more slanted towards a lot of coverage of Donald Trump. It seems like NBC and things like that were a little bit more even in showing Rubio and Cruz and Bush. If you included the cable news, and those numbers would be absolutely ridiculous.